I want to talk about some of the concepts of blockchain, but I also want to talk about some use cases.
When I was talking to CEOs, students, professors, founders, what I realized is that there is a big gap. So then I coined a field called blockchain strategy.
I'd say the most important commodity in the world, period.
Correct.
Right?
The first thing to do is to look at an end-to-end process. How would we go about improving business process while leveraging the technology?
Is this why the banks are so adamant about fighting against crypto?
I often say blockchain alone is not enough.
Hello, welcome again to our Access podcast. I'm coming to you today from Medellin, Colombia. Technically, we're actually in Morelos. We're in the beautiful apartment of Roop, one of my friends and business partners, and also meditation coach. So, thought we would talk a little bit today about blockchain and AI and the intersection between. Roop is a world-renowned traveler and speaker on blockchain. In fact, why don't you give them a little bit about your bio?
Sure, happy to. So thanks for having me, Tommy, and I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, my journey in blockchain started in 2016-17. I got into it after a career in business process automation. And at that time, I saw blockchain as a way for business process automation, which was a remarkable insight for a lot of people. Then I started researching more into it, and I got to give a couple of talks at TEDx on blockchain as an identity solution, and also blockchain for tokenized assets, how blockchain is changing the value of assets. So those talks were in 2019 and 2020. You can check them out online on YouTube. And since then, what I realized is that there is a big gap. When I was talking to CEOs, students, professors, founders, what I realized is that there is a big gap in understanding of a basic foundational technology like blockchain and then how to leverage it in a strategic manner. There was a lot of interest on the technical side. A lot of developers were into it. Crypto was coming up. And a lot of insights were there from the technical end, but not really how to create a new business out of it, how to use it for business strategy for large companies, and also how to create transformation using blockchain as a foundational technology. So then I coined a field called blockchain strategy, which is an intersection of technology, business, economics, and the leading trends which are shaping our space, like identity revolution, like decentralization, like tokenization, like currency exchange, et cetera, et cetera. So then I developed a course on blockchain strategy. So that's really a quick background. I'm happy to go into any details.
Why don't you talk, before we get into it and we talk about different concepts, why don't we talk to everybody, just tell them a little bit about your university or your courses,
yeah,
and what's covered in those courses. Obviously, I've been part of them that helped me. Why don't you tell a little bit about your courses and then we'll get into some of the other concepts.
Okay, great. So I'm glad you asked about that. I developed a few courses. I started teaching in business schools as executive education. And then these courses were then taught in side companies as corporate programs. So our flagship course is called Blockchain Strategy for Business Leaders. And it's meant for mid to senior level executives who need to understand both sides, technology basics, how does a blockchain technology functions, and also then how to leverage it to develop new business models. So it's a very interdisciplinary course. The custom format that we teach in companies is 4 days long, 8 hours. Some CIOs will tell you that it's a difficult course for them because I make them work hard. There are 25, 26 assignments. It goes over 4 days in 2 different weeks. So we use a lot of Harvard business case studies. We use a lot of recent material to understand what is happening in the trend side, but also ground them in some frameworks that I have developed, how to use blockchain as a strategy, not just only a technical solution for tactical problems, right? So, we'll share the links. You can go see what people have been saying about it.
Why don't we build on that real quick?
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the concepts of blockchain, but I also want to talk about some use cases. So we can do either order, but why don't we start with some of the use cases? What are some of the most interesting use cases? Because most people have smart contracts. They're very limited in what use cases they use. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the more interesting use cases? Then we'll go into some of the concepts, and then we'll get into the AI.
Yeah. Okay. So, as we look into use cases, then we can start with some industry segments and then look at use cases within each industry segment. So if you think of supply chain, what is a supply chain in any case? It's a network of partners, right? And some asset, some product is moving from one end of the globe to another end of the globe. The question is, how do you track that? And how quickly and securely does that information get shared with all the different partners? So if you look at current state of technology, a lot of the infrastructure, especially big companies have, is outdated. We know that. The other part is that we have created, for one reason or the other, a set of business processes that don't really connect to across the partners. What I mean by that is every partner has its own system of record. So let's say there are 8 partners in a supply chain. Let's say we're moving, I don't know, spinach or tomatoes or flowers. Colombia is a big exporter of flowers. We're moving flowers from here to Europe, for instance. Yeah. There'll be 8 partners in the way, and each of them have their own system of record. So what happens is they have to reconcile their data. What do I have? What do you have? Is it true or not? They have to true up the data, reconcile the data every so often, either every night, every week, every month. What that leads to is a disparate, almost very manual type of business processes. Okay. So if I have to track where is my pack of flowers, or where is, let's say, an invoice, or if you look in financial transactions, where is my financial transaction at the moment? Which partner is it residing at? I have to look at across all these individual systems within the boundaries of each company, right, and then have a true state of the truth, so to say. What is the state of the transaction? Now, let's look at a different paradigm using blockchain. If all of these partners were on the exact same network, and as soon as the transaction is published or confirmed, every partner gets to see that information at the exact same time. What does that mean? That means that there is less chance of fraud and manipulation. And also it means that we don't have to reconcile data amongst each other. Why? Because we are all on the same chain. We are all on the same network. We're looking at the same data at the same time. And if we all agree that the transaction is authentic and truthful, then we all agree that this is the state of transactions at the moment. There is no discrepancy, there's no argument, there's no back and forth. And also, for posterity, there is a immutable chain which records for auditing purposes. So if I want to know what happened 5 years ago at this time, what happened to that transaction, I can just go back to that particular block and that particular set of transactions and find out, because I can trust nothing has been manipulated or changed because no one party owns that infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfect sense. So I'm going to just build on that before we get into the AI real quick.
Yeah.
You said blockchain for business process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I see the value of that from a reporting standpoint, from a transparency standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. How is that, other than information and meeting with live, how would that improve the actual business process of that?
Yeah. Right? So let's assume that we go into a company, it's greenfield, meaning they don't have a blockchain implementation yet. How would we go about improving business process while leveraging the technology? The first thing to do is to look at an end-to-end process. And that is where a lot of things break down. What I mean by end-to-end is across different partners.
Vegas made millions and billions of dollars doing it for years now.
Exactly. So the end-to-end process needs to be optimized. That's part one. What that means is the business partners have to come together and agree on such a process. Where is the interchange taking place? What are the data being shared? What is our collective agreement? Right? You have to establish that before you get in the game. The second part is who owns the data, right? Because a lot, exactly. So within any business process, any company, there are companies that use data as information asymmetry. What I mean by that is if I own this data, then I hold that value and you don't own that data. I will sell, probably, I would sell the data to you, or I would let you view a limited portion of it, but I cannot give you the data. Right? Now, these are issues that you need to negotiate and come to an agreement with first. Now, let's get to implementing a chain. What would need to happen is across the supply chain partners, in the supply chain example, we would need to agree that this is the critical data we are putting on chain, and this is the rest of the data we're not putting on chain. That becomes a big decision, right? You have to really figure that out. And then once you've done that, then you have to establish nodes. One of the things that a lot of people don't seem to understand, this example that I gave, and you even mentioned Pega, you can say, well, this is running today on centralized systems. What is the issue? Why do you need blockchain for that? Sure, I get the being on the same network, but why do you need blockchain for that? The biggest thing to understand there is the following. Who owns the infrastructure? Who has the ability to manipulate or change it, theoretically? Not that they're going to, but they have the ability to. And then which data is shared and which data is owned by which party. In the conventional way, the challenge is that each party owns their own infrastructure.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
If we talk about distributed ledger, so what is blockchain in any case? In a very simplistic term, it's distributed ledger with encryption. That's essentially blockchain, without getting into too complicated, technical details. So it's a distributed ledger powered by encryption that has a shared state. So what do I mean by shared state? We talked about this metaphor a while ago. Imagine that we all live in a village and it's 80 of us, and we have transactions amongst us. You sell me some barley, I sell you some corn, etc., etc. Back in the day, how did we really keep track of that? We started keeping our own records. You keep your own record, I would keep my own record, Victor would keep his own records, etc., right? So at that time, we would need to reconcile those records. Let's say every week, we would come together with our record books. Earlier it was stone, then it became paper, then you have the idea of a ledger. We would sit and reconcile that. Okay, I sent you this, you sent me this is the net balance for this week. Okay. But what happens in that case is I need to trust your records, you need to trust mine, and if there's a dispute or a disagreement, we'll find a way to solve that. Then we went to a system where we allocated this trust to a third party. The third party typically ended up being a bank. We called it a bank. So now we don't keep our own record, or maybe we do for our personal insight, but a combined record is kept at the bank. And we actually trust the bank. We said, okay, whatever the bank said, we believe. And if there's a dispute, well, we'll go with what the bank records say. It doesn't matter what my ledger said or your ledger said. Right? So now let's look at a different system. Different system being, let's put up a wall in a public place in the village, a giant wall. Every time we have a transaction, we will go write that transaction on the wall. Once we write that transaction, we, the people who had the transaction, believe that to be true and authentic, and it's written on the wall, literally carved on the wall, so it cannot be changed forever. What also happens is there are other 78 people in the village who also see that transaction between the two of us. So they become the validators of such a transaction. Yes, this happened, I validate, thank you, cheers. That shared wall is a shared state.
Okay.
Right? So that's what I mean by distributed computing, powered by encryption, with a shared state.
Okay.
That's a blockchain. Right? So coming back to our original question of, well, why is this helpful? In this today's day and age, if you look across different supply chains of any asset, an asset could be an advertising inventory, an asset could be flowers, an asset could be financial transactions, an asset could be expensive wine bottles, luxury goods like handbags, etc. You name it, right? At the end, everybody wants the same information, which is the truth. So allowing blockchain across the network, where we have agreed to what data to share, what data to keep, and agreed to rules of the road. When the transaction is published, we all consider it to be true. It enables a shared state, which is really difficult to create in today's infrastructure.
So this is why the banks, is this why the banks, because we're eating into their transactional model, right? So now we don't necessarily need the bank to be our third party record keeper. Is this why the banks are so adamant about fighting against crypto?
Well, that's one of the reasons, right? As you can imagine. So look at the history of Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin essentially? And I don't really want to get into crypto in too much detail, but since you brought it up, Bitcoin was the first form of digital cash that did not require a third party, i.e., a bank. And it had cryptographic functions established, we call it a consensus mechanism established, which made sure that the chain, or essentially the ledger, cannot be hacked or manipulated or in any way deleted, right? These two things, well, the third thing being account balances, meaning wallet balances. It made sure that you cannot spend more than what is in your account balance, what is in your wallet balance, right? These three things enabled the world's first digital cash system amongst peers, peer to peer, me to you, without a third party, any third party.
Very cool, but they're all financial systems, which I've said for a long time, thrive on the transaction, the number of transactions. They don't care who wins or loses as long as there's transactions because they're racking in the transaction fees.
Yeah. So at the end, talking about why incumbents in general don't like new technology. I mean, at the end, it threatens their business case. It threatens their survivability in a lot of ways, right? So I like history stories. You in the mood for a history story?
I love history. Let's do it.
Okay. So let's go back to 1800s, around 1860s. In the United States, it's a turbulent time. The country is going through civil war. And it is at the same time the country is going through war with the Native Indians.
Yep.
And around the same time, railroad is being established, intercontinental railroad. And around the same time, there's an entrepreneur who wants to develop a system to deliver mail from one coast of the United States to the other,
Right.
from New York to California. Right. That entrepreneur starts what then was known as the Pony Express. It was a series of riders, horse riders. They would ride 100 to 150 miles. They would change horses then, and they would carry satchels of mail. Before then, mail was transported in horse buggies, and it would take about 20 to 25 days for the mail to go from New York to San Francisco. With the Pony Express, with a series of riders riding through really tough terrain, bearing the weather, and a lot of Indian threat, etc., they remarkably reduced the time frame from 25 days to 10 days to deliver mail from one end of the United States to the other. Okay. Now, around the same time, 1861, Congress passed a law to set up telegraph poles across the United States.
Yep.
On the day 24th October, I believe, is the day when the first message on a telegraph was sent intercontinentally, meaning across, or sorry, in inside the United States, right? Across the two coasts.
Yep.
Within 2 days, the Pony Express shut down. And that is the definition of disruption. What is it? It's making the old model obsolete.
Yep.
It doesn't exist anymore. There's no need for it. And Pony Express at that time lost about $200,000 of that time's money, and all the riders that were doing that job lost their jobs, etc., etc. But that is a classic example of technology, led disruption. So now transpose that to today's time. If there were models to do things without third parties, or let's even extend that, without parties that add too much value, in my opinion.
Right.
So because if you look at the supply chain or the network that you want to be on, the first question you would ask is, I'm building this blockchain for this so-and-so use case. Who should be on that network? Should Tommy be on it? Should Victor be on it? Should Jaslene be on it? And why? What value do they add? What can they do that nobody else can? And what that type of thinking allows to do is to create the network, which is really small and a value add network. Wherein in today's business processes, you will find a lot of parties that are in the network that just don't add any value.
I would say banks don't have no value.
Yeah, exactly. So the point here is, you would think of all the parties that don't add value, and it's the same parties that don't add value are threatened by disruption. And you can look at it across different supply chains or different industries, so to say.
Right.
You can look at healthcare, you can look at advertising, you can look at any type of industry, and you'll find entities that don't add no value.
Right.
And their livelihood would be threatened.
I think going back, we're jumping ahead a little bit on the AI side, but that's every industry, every job now. I mean, it's been privileged to study out last week that incomes go up, productivity goes up with AI, up until they reach about 30-35%, and then all of a sudden jobs start plummeting.
Yeah.
Right? Because they proved the validation that AI will do this better, more productively, right?
Yeah.
And then once that's proven, the jobs are going to go. So I think you're going to see more productivity across every function, every industry, and I'm not one of the ones that say, "Oh, well, we're creating more jobs and we're going to." I think there's going to be some unemployment for sure for at least a while. And maybe it even sets the work week, how many hours, and there's, I can see a fundamental transition. But it's and the reason, and the area that everybody seems to understand explains recruiting. Like, I find very little value in recruiters. I'm just going to say it, right? They don't know the technology, they don't, and so you look at everything that they do, and you go, shoot, AI's already doing it, right? And so, what really value do they have other than you're busy, you don't have time to go look at resumes? They throw resumes, and then what they're supposed to do is throw great resumes at you. What they do is throw any resume at you. And so you're winding up looking at resumes anyhow, right? It is a fundamental position that's out there that I don't think adds much value, and that makes them, that endangers them. I think the whole industry will be revolutionized. I think AI will do all recruiting except negotiating. Right? And there's still the personal side of things. But I think, and that's just a core example of industries that are going to go away, right? And so, yeah, I think this, it was a good description of disruption. And now I want to talk about AI and blockchain and how that's going to disrupt. But before I do, I think we should probably cover some of the basics. You did a little bit of it. Why don't you cover some of the basics of just what blockchain is, what's the fundamental things that people need to know, what are the fundamental terms, right? And then from there we'll get into some of the.
Okay. Yeah, so we covered some of that, so we can review and then add to it. So to me, blockchain is a distributed ledger enabled through encryption with a shared state. If you look at, there's two types of categories you can develop blockchain. One is public and one is private, permission based, and the other one would be public, permissionless. So all these examples of crypto blockchains that you hear about. By the way, here's chapter 2. Crypto is not equal to blockchain. Blockchain is not equal to crypto. Blockchain is a foundational technology that has multiple use cases, and we've gone through a few, and we'll go through a few more. Crypto is one specific use case of blockchain, which is used for exchanging payments or even tokenized asset. We'll get into that in a second. But it's one specific use case. It's like saying, back in the 90s when internet first came around, people started saying, well, internet is just equal to email. Well, it's not. Yeah. As we understand now, internet was a foundation set of protocols which then enabled a set of different applications. One of them was email. Right. And so is now Instagram and Twitter and everything else you use, right? So let's not conflate the foundation set of protocols with the applications that are built on top of it. Okay. So having said that, some terms to know. One is consensus mechanism. What is a consensus mechanism? Consensus mechanism is, let's call it an algorithm, an encryption-based algorithm that a blockchain uses to ensure that the ledger is sacrosanct, meaning the ledger cannot be tampered with, cannot be manipulated or deleted in any which way, and the nodes are not compromised. The network itself is not taken over by bad actors, right? So there are different types of consensus networks. I'm not going to go into that in detail today, but essentially one consensus mechanism is not the same as the other. And the efficiency of one is not the same as the other. Here's a typical criticism that you will hear about blockchain, and I'll explain that with one simple framework. People used to say, and some still do, that blockchains are slow. That's a very archaic argument by now. See, blockchains are developed on this principle of a triangle. Think of a triangle and the three sides of a triangle. One side is decentralization, the other side is security, and the third side is throughput. So I'll repeat that. Security, decentralization, and throughput. Okay. How decentralized or distributed is the network? Or the other way to say it, how centralized is it? Okay. How many nodes are there in the network? Yeah. Are there just 3 nodes and you call it a blockchain? Or there are 15,000 nodes or 15 million nodes? How many nodes exist? How decentralized is it? Because that's a function that governs or affects other functions. And that's a principle we look at, decentralization. Okay. The second being, how many throughput, how many transactions can you publish in a time period? In a minute, how many transactions can you publish? Or what is the time to publish one transaction for that matter? Or what is the time to confirm one block of transactions?
I think the more secure, the less throughput, right?
Correct, absolutely. And that is the example of Bitcoin. It is the most secure consensus mechanism. It costs the more in terms of electricity, literally computing power, and hence it is the most secure. It is a design and not a bug. It is a feature and not a bug that Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain network, but it has one of the lowest throughputs, right? Now, if you look into today's date, there are a lot of consensus mechanisms that are more efficient than the original granddaddy of them all, being Bitcoin. And there are a lot of really fast throughput, decently decentralized blockchain networks available today. Not everything is as slow as Bitcoin, right? There's a lot of examples of that today. You look at Polygon, you look at Cosmos, I can go through a long list. And by the way, I'm not endorsing any one or the other, right? This is just design principles we're talking about, right? So talking about terms, this is consensus mechanism. And if you really want to understand blockchains, go deeper into each consensus mechanism or each category of consensus mechanism. And then when you look at a new chain, you ask the question, well, what is the consensus mechanism used, right? Okay, that was the discussion on public permissionless chains. What does permissionless means? That anybody who agrees to the software, what is the software in any case? It's a set of rules, right? So anybody who agrees to run these rules on their system can join the network. You don't need a bank's permission. You don't need the creator of Bitcoin's permission. You don't need a government's permission. You don't need anybody's permission. All you need is the hardware to run the software and the agreement that you will run the software as it is published. And that is permissionless. Now, the challenge a lot of people have, especially in bug companies in permissionless, is that they think, well, I don't want to publish my transactions in public. I want a permission-based system. So now we're going back to our examples of supply chain or any network that is between selected partners, and these have been selected or given the permission to join the network, right? If Tom, Dick, and Harry comes and says, I want to join the network, you're like, no, sorry, this is our network, and we are going to transact only on our network. Gotcha. Right? So those are permission-based networks, and hence they're also private in terms of who can view that in data, who can view the transaction history, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, yeah. Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's the big picture.
All right. So I want to go back to use cases. You mentioned, the foundational technology versus use cases. Certainly crypto is one. Smart contracts is one, right? You mentioned supply chain being one. Just very quickly, what are the top 5, 6, 10 use cases that you've seen in the marketplace? And then we'll start talking about how AI impacts.
Sure. So in the category of use cases, till now we've only discussed use cases that have some level of network where it is being transacted among certain parties. There's a whole category of use case called tokenized assets. So this is what my second TEDx talk was on. So if you want to go deeper, you can watch that. But the idea is quite basic. Anything that is physical today, or even digital for that matter, can be created into a blockchain-based, cryptographically secure digital twin. And that becomes a tokenized asset. What do I mean by that? This building we're sitting in, the car that drives on the road, your phone, your television, your refrigerator, your bike, your shoes, your bags, everything essentially can be and is in the process of and will eventually be a digital twin. And each of these become an asset on their own. So let's say diamonds. I want to track diamonds from where they originate to when they're sold. Or take anything else, real estate. Tokenized real estate is a huge use case. Let's then take a use case in healthcare of patient data, essentially tokenized data. Now, in this case, I'm not talking about something physical. It's something patient data may already be digital. So, you got blood work done. My question is, where does that live? Where is it stored? How secure is it? Your x-rays, your MRIs, your diagnosis, et cetera, your prescriptions. Each of them, to my mind, can be and is going to be and is in the process of being tokenized digital asset. So, we will trade, or we are trading tokenized digital assets already. You can think of luxury goods like bags, or you can think of Nike's crypto kicks, or you can think of art, right? High net worth art, yep. Right? So what blockchain does is allows you to authenticate the first instance of that asset and say that this is, let's say there is a painting behind you. Let's say this was a Van Gogh painting, but how the fuck you know? Pardon my language. But how does anybody know, right? You have to go through an authentication process to say that, yes, this is an authentic Rembrandt, authentic Van Gogh, authentic Picasso, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that applies to luxury goods, like, let's say, an expensive watch, an authentic Rolex, or an authentic handbag, So once you can authenticate the original instance of the asset, you put that on the chain, and then you track it from ownership to ownership.
Okay.
And that is a way to trade digital assets in a primary market where they're originated, and also in a secondary market amongst peer-to-peer, right? So what we are now seeing, and these are also, by the way, called NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I won't get into too much detail on that, but NFTs had their heyday back, 3 years ago, 21, 22.
Everybody was the craze.
Right. So that's a use case of blockchain, essentially, right? A foundational technology, then use cases.
I'll give you a good use case too.
Yes.
A friend of ours, we both have, works for Unfi, right? He's the big global distributor that brings in food from all over the world, and they're the ones that provide Costco and all
Yes.
those things. Yeah, joint friend of ours, Ramesh. So, from conversations that I've had, it sounds like the FDA is basically going to make you be able to track, much like cannabis business now, from seed
Yes.
to table, right?
Yes.
And now the FDA is going to be able to do that. And now the question is the technology exists. Like you said, blockchain can help in this. We have IoT, you have everything. How are you going to get a farmer in Honduras that's planting the ground? Like, how are you tracking it at that point? Like, how can blockchain kind of help solve some of those issues?
Yeah. So today you use Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, most of us do. How many times in a day do you stop and think about HTTPS protocol? None, right? When you're sending that picture or you're posting that video, do you think about the tech stack, the TCP/IP protocol, HTTPS, the whole tech network stack that enables that one picture to go up on this application, then everybody can see it? You don't. Blockchain or blockchains are essentially protocols. They are a evolution of protocols. So when we talk about such applications and a farmer using it, we need to create layers of application which the farmer doesn't have to know. Anybody doesn't have to know what is underneath the layers, but they need to trust the data that's coming out of it, right? So I'll give you a simple example of something similar. I think IBM created a platform called Food Trust, and a similar example exists in a lot of other areas. They were tracking spinach early on. It started with that whole recall of spinach. So what happened is, some spinach in some store went bad, people went sick, and then FDA recalled a lot of spinach. The question is, which boxes, which packages of spinach do we need to recall? And it took them days to find an answer to that. And why is that? That goes back to my original point, because everybody kept their own individual records, and the records didn't talk to each other. There was no one state of the truth.
Well, and even then, by the time you got to the distributor, he would take it from 100 different ones and put it
Exactly.
in the box.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows? Right?
Correctly. So they started this network called Food Trust, and the idea was to track spinach from the actual farm to the retail store. Okay. So you should be able to scan a barcode and find the provenance of this spinach. When was it cultivated? Which location, which square mile of the world it was in, which different distributors, wholesalers did it go through to end up in this particular store. And that's just an example of how you would do it. I've seen similar examples in fishes. You would catch a fish. Well, where was this fish caught? I don't know. You go to the restaurant and ask them, hey, where's this fish from? Can they tell you? Barely. Which geographic and climatic condition was this fish caught? And then how was it stored? How was it transported? Yeah. So I've seen examples of that being done. Right? So the way to do it is, coming back to the farmer challenge. You mentioned just now IoT. So essentially, the way to do it is to take sensor data directly and record it on the chain. So you essentially remove the human intervention as much as you possibly can, right? If you look at this use case called Everledger, Everledger designed a blockchain to track diamonds
Okay.
from their origins into the mine right down to the retail store they're sold at. Same concept. But what they did is they installed software and a lot of other technological stack along each step of the process at the company that finds the raw diamonds, then polishes them, and then cuts them, then retails them, wholesales them, and then retails them. At every step of the way, they had sensors recording what is happening to that one diamond.
Okay.
And that's how you create a chain of data, and then you share that data amongst the network. So it's authenticated, and it's also immutable, and it's the version of truth. So the basic point here is, I often say, blockchain alone is not enough. Blockchain alone cannot solve these problems.
Right.
You need a technology stack.
Right.
You need AI. So in the use case of fish, actually it uses AI to determine what is the variety, what is the biological name of the fish that somebody just caught. You scan it with a device and it tells you what is this fish using AI. Blockchain doesn't do that.
So that's a good intersection.
Yes.
What are the trends in blockchain? Before we get purely into AI, I think let's talk holistically. Just what are the trends in blockchains, the cutting edge kind of concepts that are going now? You mentioned IoT, right? Let's talk just for a few minutes about that, and then I imagine that'll lead us into the AI discussion, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the cutting edge is the intersection of AI and blockchain. So let's put a pin in that. The others, to me, right now, are creating more efficiency in the public chains. So think of it as generations of technology. If Bitcoin was generation one, we're now how many years? About 15 years from Bitcoin. So I would say we are in maybe generation 2 or 3 of the efficiency and throughput and security algorithms used underlying blockchains. So we're getting a lot more efficient and a lot more throughput. So if one was to create, let's say, a high frequency trading platform, stocks trading platform, but on an underlying blockchain infrastructure, today you can, because such blockchains throughput with that level of throughput exist.
Okay.
Right? Earlier they did not. And then to me, there is really good work being done on the tokenized asset side. Again, asset is anything considered of value. So it could be from baseball cards to art, as we discussed, to tokenized real estate,
They're not doing it for oil, gas.
oil and gas. So essentially, what is like a liter of oil? You can convert it into a tokenized asset. Same for gas. So there's a lot of this work being done where there is integration between IoT and blockchain and AI, and that I would call cutting edge at the moment.
So let's talk about that. Talk to me about where you think AI is going to play a bigger role within the blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah. So that's an interesting way to phrase the question. I've been asked this question: is blockchain going to help AI, or AI going to help blockchain? Think about it. And I think that's actually not the right metaphor to look at, right framing to look at. These are both foundational technologies. We need to look at intersection of what they can enable together, right? So what does that mean? Like we looked at historical examples. Think of it as smartphones and data infrastructure and apps. Back in 2000s, we didn't have the type of telecom pipes to send in that amount of data. We didn't have these types of smartphones, and hence, as a result, we didn't have the types of apps that we can use really easily now on our smartphone. What changed? What transformed? What transformed is, it's a chicken and egg thing, but apps came which required more data, which pushed the telecom companies, the AT&Ts, Verizons of the world, to develop better pipes for their data infrastructure. They got into LTE and those types of technologies. And on the other side, we saw an improvement in the hardware of smart contracts, be it the phone, the size of the phone, the battery life, the camera life, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a great analogy, but I will tell you that I went to Austin.
Yeah.
To the biggest event, blockchain event.
Yeah.
I walked out, I talked to every single vendor there. There was over 100. 3 days of just booth after booth. And one question: what's your AI strategy? That was it. That's all I asked. If there were 5 that had a strategy, I would be surprised.
Okay.
The vast majority of them looked at me like, now, the couple that did was more on the reporting side, like they were more kind of like your stock reporters, like they were reporting on the performance of different crypto and that kind of thing. So they were kind of more of a BI company in a sense, dashboard company, and so they had AI a little bit. But fundamentally, the rest of them were just like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, right? And so it seemed to me as an industry, blockchain, just the companies that are in blockchain, whether it's smart contracts, AP, payroll, whatever, all these aren't even thinking about the advantages of it.
Yeah. I would say there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. The intersection of AI and blockchain is a leading edge field. And I'll tell you a few categories of use cases and a few companies that are into it. But a lot of them are not. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the evolution takes time, So let's look at categories of use cases at the intersection of blockchain and AI. One of the main ones is decentralized computing. What I mean by that is, what is the biggest resource required for AI today? It's compute, right? At the moment, compute is essentially controlled by a few centralized players. I won't name them, but you can imagine which one.
The big boys.
Right? So let's look at a scenario where, let's say we're starting a startup, and this is a real scenario a lot of people face, and we want to train some AI models or even just develop applications on top of AI models. We need compute. Compute is expensive. So it is a pay-to-play market. The more money you have, the more compute you have. The more GPUs you can hire, et cetera, right? So on and so forth. So in this case, our right to build doesn't exist. What I mean by that is, if I wanted to build something, I couldn't because I don't have the money. Why do I have not the compute? Because the compute is controlled by centralized players, right? And they set the prices.
That's interesting,
right? Now let's flip that model. If there was a platform that allowed anybody to offer their compute, meaning their processing power, if there was a protocol that would enable for me, you, Victor, anybody to offer their compute, and then whoever needs to use it can use it for a reasonable price, but it is decentralized, not one party. So tomorrow, if Tommy decided, I don't want to offer my computer, I have something else to do with my laptop, and I don't want to offer you my computer at the moment, fair enough. There is thousands of others that do, and it is decentralized. There is no one central party, central authority controlling that point.
I know, and I get that.
Yeah.
But as you say that, I'm thinking they make money both ways, right? Because, for example, if I need my mobile, right? But my mobile is running on T-Mobile, Verizon. So either way, they probably get you, even in the decentralized model, you're still using most of the compute power from the big guys, right? So do they win either way? You know what I'm saying? Whether you go directly to AWS or all your storage and all your compute power is on AWS because that's what you use on your laptop, right? Maybe
No,
not.
I'm not talking about that scenario. You're going to cloud compute and cloud storage. I'm not talking about that.
Well, you're actually, I guess, as I was talking to the because you're talking about the actual
hardware
chip on the hardware.
Correct. Correct.
So in essence, though, instead of the cloud providers, it's the chip providers.
Well, obviously, the NVIDIA wins no matter what. That's a whole another discussion. So the use case we're talking about here is distributed computing. So if a platform existed where it had protocols that you could join the computer, and it's then a marketplace for buyers and sellers of compute. I need this much today, I need that much tomorrow. I can go buy it, use it, pay for it in a reasonable cost, and everybody in the community is contributing to that compute, right? So that is a platform called Genesis,
Okay.
right? And you take a step further. Genesis is essentially any type of compute can be added to the, call it the shared pool,
Okay.
right? And then an AI developer can use it for training models, or for developing applications, etc. You take it to the next level. There's one called Deep Brain Chain. Deep Brain Chain claims to be the first AI public blockchain that for AI enablement, and they are a decentralized computing, but only with GPUs.
Interesting.
Anybody can add their
What
GPU.
was the name of that?
Deep Brain Chain.
Okay.
Okay, and they went live just quite recently in 2024, right? So that unlocks the doors for a lot of things.
And just out of curiosity, do you have any kind of comparison on compute cost direct versus even if you get it versus?
Yeah, no, I haven't gone. Yeah, I haven't gone that deep. But before we even get into that, let me also point out the obvious flaw in that, or issues in that model, before your listeners say, "Hey, but blah blah blah." Well, here's the but. The but is latency is high, and there are questions on security concerns,
Sure.
right? So if you centralize anything, you can have higher throughput, and you could be the security responsibility becomes of the centralized provider, right? Herein there are questions on that, although I'm sure that the developers of these protocols have looked into these matters, and these technologies will get better, right? But it's a opposite model, centralized versus decentralized.
I don't think I'd use it for productivity, but for using it for development, where
Sure.
it's somewhat defined. Yeah, I mean, I can see the value of it.
Correct. Now, we can go a next step further and look at, we talked about tokenized data. So the intersection,
It's a very interesting thing to me.
yes, to me as well. The intersection of AI and blockchain, what does it enable? Well, what does AI need? What is the biggest beast that needs to be fed? And what is it feeding? It's feeding data.
Yep.
Data is the most important commodity in terms of training a model.
I'll go even one further. Not even just most important. I'd say the most important commodity in the world. Period.
Correct.
Right. You could say if the world went down, oil and water would be up there, but in a modern, traditional world, data would be.
Yeah.
Right? But not only is it the most important commodity, it's the most underutilized and under valued. Meaning, most companies don't even look at how they can commercialize their data.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for me, it's just a huge industry that needs to be not. There needs to be players that come and optimize it, and I believe there'll be some of the new Googles of the world will be these kind of
Yes.
data commercialization things.
Yes. Right. So you started the topic. I'll pick from that. Commercialized data. The question is how. You take a data in any domain. Let's take theoretical physics, aerospace, organic chemistry, bioinformatics, ethical research, or any other domain you can think of. Today, most of the LLMs that you see have been trained off publicly available data, although there are controversies there too. We can get into that, what is publicly available and to be used, but most of them have been on publicly available data, not on this niche domain data.
Right.
So the question becomes, well, the AI beast needs feeding specific data. Let's say I'm solving a particular type of cancer, and there are only 3 academic institutions in the world that have done research on that particular type of cancer, and they hold that data, and they are not willing to share it with anybody else. Why? They have their reasons. But if we could tokenize that data and they could offer it on a marketplace where the market could set a price for it, and they, as the data owner, could set the limitations or parameters of what that data can be used for, then they might be more amenable to share that. Right? Yep. The terms have to be right. Yep. And the protocol has to be such that the data is not being transferred or being given ownership to some other party. They still keep the data on their premises, on their prem, but they allow for compute on that data.
So bringing it all the way around, this to me is where distributed, a distributed model where you have what's the word I'm looking for? Distributed ledger.
Yes.
Right? Perfect, because it's my data.
Exactly.
100,000 companies are making money off my data right now.
Thank you.
Right? And the only way that I know that they're doing that is there needs to be a distributed ledger so that I know, and then I can charge them for my data. Right? And think about how many companies are making money off of your data right now.
Yeah, that's the business. That's the majority of the business models today.
And so, how do you take back control of that in a decentralized way with a decentralized ledger where you can then go, hey, no, you gotta settle with me, right? Or I'll just put out my fee per, and you can consume it as long as you're willing to pay whatever fee that I'm willing to pay. Right?
Yeah. It's a very interesting example. You reminded me of a startup company I helped and just had really good conversations with. I think their name is still Bounty Media. So, Jake, if you're around, hey, their business model is very interesting. They did exactly what you said. They did it in Southeast Asia. They took your data and they offered brands like, let's say, Nike or Adidas or any kind of consumer brand. They said, how much would you pay to access this profile of data? And they proved that, yes, we have the data. You set a price. Now, sometimes what they did is didn't even add the price in terms of a dollar value. They got what they call publishers of content, like a New York Times or a Financial Post, etc., Economic Times. And they said, okay, if we could give you a subscription for such and such thing for such and such time, would you part with your data for 6 months? They created that platform.
Interesting.
So they monetized the data. And they gave the data owner, which is you and me, the individual, enough of a value, either in a barter term or in a dollar term, to part with that data. Yeah. And the best part is, let me just finish that use case. The best part is the brands know what data they're getting, because in traditional advertising, it's a spray and pray approach. Yeah. They don't know exactly who's watching your program or who is using your products.
If you think about the way the trends of the laws are going, right? GDPR, all this stuff, right? It's going to be pretty much where you can call Coca-Cola and say, tell me how you use my data.
Yeah.
Right? And you think Coca-Cola's really going to try? Like, should they have a hard time? Not talking ill of Coke, it's an example. Any big enterprise company, let's say ABC company. Do you think ABC really knows the data to that level? Like, they have a hard time, doing master data management, much less, trying to track that out. So I think what will happen is they will then outsource that to somebody else who takes the risk, right? And then as the data comes in, it filters through them, much like we have a lot of other data platforms right now. And they will then commoditize that and commercialize that based off and have contact with the people and have a rate and all these types of things. So I don't know exactly how it's going to morph, but I see that coming.
Yeah. And the name is Ocean Protocol. It's a decentralized data exchange. It's exactly what you just described. Data is an asset which has a market. You tokenize, so I can go and say, listen, I have this data. They help me tokenize that data, put it on the marketplace. There are buyers who are interested in the data that I am offering. They can quote a price. We can do a trade in terms of price, and we choose the type of underlying currency we want to do the trade on. And then I can let you use the data for the purpose that you set, right? Now, again, Ocean Protocol is one example. There are plenty of such examples. I'm not
This is where I think
advertising or sponsoring any one of them.
but you get me thinking. Like, this is where I think AI could play a role.
Yeah.
For example, what I mean by that. So you kind of need somebody to represent you. There's so many companies. You sign so many things. You go online. You approve this, right? Like, it's hard to know where your data is really going, right? So you almost need, yes, you need a marketplace, but you also need to have an agent.
Agent, yes.
Right? Why not have AI be that agent?
Yes.
Right? And be able to track and communicate with all the different companies and then, sell the data. So to me, that might be a really good use case for AI, is this kind of personalized data agent that goes out and gets all the approvals, negotiates, and
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I'll take that step further from where you left off. Let's call that agent an autonomous economic agent. Just a term. It's autonomous because it knows where to go find things and execute on algorithms. It's economic because it's looking for economic value, in this case for our data, right? Now, at the intersection of AI and blockchain, what can be enabled? When this autonomous AI agent goes, either sells my data or there are other agents that are doing compute on that data, where is that set of decisions? As in any AI agent, you know this very well. What are they really doing? They're making a series of decisions, and there is a series of triggers that is happening, right? The question is, where are those decisions being recorded and stored, and how accessible they are?
Okay.
For the purposes to see what was done with this data, and also what was the decision-making process logic used, right? And for posterity, if something went wrong, well, okay, let's look at the decision tree and see what happened there. At the moment, it is stored only in logs. And one must be really sophisticated to find the logs and say, okay, this is what happened to my data, right? Or these are the decisions being made. Now, take a different world where all the decisions in an agentic machine to machine process are stored on an immutable ledger called the blockchain.
Love it. Yeah.
They live there forever. You can go back in posterity, look at how decision making was done based on these algorithmic changes, and if you have the next generation of the agent, well, what are the algorithmic changes affecting the data now?
So why are not the banks doing this? Like, why aren't, like, you would think that this could revolutionize what they do, and rather than be disrupted, why not be the disruptor? Why you would think they would be spending all the money on R&D?
So I'm going to hold my emotions and be professional and say, okay, let's go back. There is a theory, if you've heard of it, called red ocean and blue ocean.
Yeah.
It came from a professor at INSEAD in Europe. The theory basically said, if you know the definition of a red ocean and blue ocean, just for the audience, the red ocean is existing products and services where everybody, all the providers are competing for the same demand. A blue ocean is not much of product exists today. The market doesn't exist today. And you create a new market, and then a majority of the new demand that is hence created is owned by you because you created it for a certain period of time before that becomes a red ocean itself.
By the way, if you wanted to look at percentage of billionaires made between red ocean and blue ocean, it's probably 95% or more.
Thank you. Ocean. Thank you. It is only the blue ocean.
It's finding that product that no one has.
Correct.
That you get it. And by the way, if you've not seen it, look for Elon Musk's ex-wife.
Yeah.
talking to Stanford grad, where the Stanford grad asked her, if he worked really hard, stuff on the floor, and did all these things like Elon Musk, he'd be a billionaire. And she looked at him and said, "No. Why would? If that was the case, we'd all be billionaires, right? The only way you make a billionaire is find a product, find a service nobody else has done, give it to people, people give you money. That's how you. That's how you become.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of.
It is the simplest,
Yeah,
wisest thing I heard.
exactly. And that is why banks don't do it. Because most incumbents, let's not just label banks, most incumbents, be it in healthcare, be it in transportation, logistics, manufacturing, most incumbents strategy is to compete in red oceans. They are trying to make incremental improvements to their product or service. They're trying to get incremental margins, take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% from the competitor, but they are not thinking of creating a blue ocean and entering a completely new market.
I mean, but I would argue, if I were there, I mean, first of all, we can get into the theory of how colleges have screwed business up because it's the whole stockholder value every quarter, short term. That's why I like Elon Musk, whether you like him as a person or not. You gotta admit he has the longest term vision out of anybody that's out there that's doing things. He's planning for 50 years, not this quarter. So he lost 20% of Tesla value. Who cares, right? So I think universities have screwed that up. But I would, if I were on the board of a bank, I'd be like, yeah, but Blue Ocean gives us the competitive advantage over everybody else. If we're first in, first market, we own it, we dominate it. I tell you, who's a good bank does that. Here's Bank Colombia in Colombia. Like they're now doing 25% of the transactions in all Colombia. It's just one bank, and they're talking about being over 50 in like a year. They invest in companies like Wampy and do startups and stuff like that, right? They have a vision of where is the market going and where do they need to be ahead digitally. They're much more advanced than the banks, digitally speaking, than the banks in the U.S.
Yeah. So funny you mentioned Bank of Colombia. I happen to know that Bank of Colombia actually started their own stablecoin last year in 2024, right? And that's another use case of blockchain we haven't really gotten into. A stablecoin is not the same as any other cryptocurrency. It is backed by a basket of assets, and it is stable. It is pegged to an asset, right? It may not be backed by a basket. It may be just pegged to an asset, but the point is that it is stable. The value doesn't fluctuate. There's not as much volatility as you see in other cryptos. So a stable coin as a means of cross-border, international payments is an emerging solution, and Bank of Colombia designed and offered their own stable coin. So that tells you their level of sophistication.
If you think about outsourcing and stuff like that, which I come from, I don't know any outsourcing company that doesn't use crypto, that shouldn't be using crypto for payroll.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can do it to where you only have a 5-minute liability, right? But you don't have to worry about currencies, ups and downs. So I've started transitioning everything to payroll being in crypto just because I don't have to deal with the whole exchange rates and everything.
Yeah, well, that's another use case, right? So coming back to why banks don't do it. That conversation you said, if I was on the board of a bank, I would say, hey, we should create blue oceans, etc. I have been in those conversations, and I have seen their faces, and I've seen their responses. And I'm not going to label all of them with one broad stroke, but the reality is it's risk. The new venture may not work. If you look in today's corporate world, there are many companies that have developed innovation studios and venture studios, but most of them are literally looking for inorganic acquisitions, inorganic growth through acquisitions. They are not looking for creating or being an incubator of new products and new technologies and new solutions for their customers that are moving to a different world.
Not that, again, I'm not pro Bank Colombia or nothing like that. I just happen to know some of the executives in Bank Colombia, and I've talked to them about some business deals. But one thing I know about them is they're sharp investors, and some of the U.S. banks should look at it. When downtime, like I was talking about a project that's sizable, and we were pretty far down the road, and then the uh, the fintech started collapsing right around a lot of things, and so banks or companies that they were interested in buying 2 years ago wouldn't even talk to them. Now we're coming to them to sell, and so in the bad times they're doing acquisitions left and right, right?
Yeah.
But then in the good times, they actually started funds for doing startups like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all around fintech startups. They got two funds. One is all fintech. One is more I'd say more geopolitical, social kind of. It's good for the the countries they're in and that kind of thing. And so again, I we're not going to solve this problem today, but if there's a bank exec out there, I would tell you these types of blue oceans around crypto and around AI and blockchain and around distributed. If there's one that got into the lead, I don't know that they'd be surpassed in 50 years.
Yeah. So here's another point I want to add, which is the attitude towards innovation from American incumbents versus other parts of the world. And now I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about Middle East, I'm talking about Southeast Asia and Latin America.
Something you said that I just want one quick thought.
Yeah.
In business in general, U.S. is more risk averse. They got more
Correct.
money. They do more startups. But the banks seem to be like the banks in Asia are much more innovative than the banks in the U.S. It seems like that's weird.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly the conclusion that I've had, not just with banks. I'm going to put a blanket label of incumbent companies. Let's call them Fortune 1000, incumbent large enterprises. Pick any sector, any domain, doesn't matter. Like, look at aerospace. I mean, sorry, not aerospace, aviation. The American aviation, which is just two companies essentially, are the most outdated ones there is, and it's essentially a monopoly. And that's the case in a lot of industries that are from the US. So the point being, the attitude towards innovation and the attitude towards risk taking is very different in the US versus rest of the world. So if you talk about blockchain and digital assets and even AI, that for that matter, look at Singapore, look at Dubai's 2045 vision. I mean, the government departments are investing and creating public utilities, simple things as my license being on a blockchain. License is a form of identity, and there's so much fraud in licenses, which is it's an essential ID that can be used to open a bank account, do any other thing. Why would not a license or a passport be on a blockchain, an immutable ledger that is tamper resistant? Why is it still in databases?
Interesting.
Right? So there are jurisdictions across the world in Europe and Middle East that have done that and that are on the track to digitize or even say tokenize a lot of their assets, being real estate. Look at Dubai. They're selling buildings in tokenized real estate today, And you say, well, why can't we do it? Well, there's a lot of headwinds here. So the way I have seen the strategy a lot of large incumbents have, and I have nothing against them. I've worked with them and I advise them. I've trained a lot of people from banks in my courses. That is why I know their mindset, right? And when I train them, they see the value, but they live in an environment that doesn't allow them to innovate. Honestly, if you look at some of the use cases, I think JP Morgan had one where they developed a blockchain solution and they correctly spun it off as a separate venture so that the incumbent mothership, so to say, their policies their thinking, their mindset does not affect the little startup, the venture that they started, and I think that is the right way to do it because they're so institutionalized in their old ways and they're so risk averse because their decision making is very layered. Nobody wants to take the onus of a decision to start something. Because if they do, their careers, and if it doesn't work out, their careers are at risk. So everybody's risk averse, So the point I'm making is that, yes, these are the institutions that need to evolve and innovate, and they're the most in a position to because they understand the current state.
And they got the cash.
And they have the resources, right? But that exactly becomes their burden to bear because they live in the current state. That's actually one of the, so backing up in my courses, I teach 5 intellectual hurdles that you must overcome to see the value of tokenized assets, to see the value of why blockchain is better than current state technology. We're not going to give that away right now because if I did, I'll be here another hour, right? We'll share you the link for the courses. You can watch it. But I'll tell you that one of the things that stops incumbent professionals from taking a leap is because they're stuck in their current state. They cannot envision a world where the world does not function in the state that they helped create in the last 30 years or so. It's a mental phenomenon, right? They cannot believe that a new world could exist. Till an innovator's, a classic innovator's dilemma, if you will, till an innovator comes and shows, like for example, PayPal. Nobody could believe that PayPal could exist or would add any value, but it was an amazing innovation at that time.
Yeah, it's funny. This is the dilemma in consulting too. Consulting, finding a problem and solving a problem is easy. Finding an opportunity is really hard, right? And let's face it. And people go, oh, well, we do that. And I'm like, really? Well, then how come you aren't billionaires?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you're really good at finding opportunities nobody else had out there, I'm just thinking you might not be a billionaire, right? And so it's the consulting dilemma between, are you just a problem solver, or can you really, is there a process really in identifying opportunity and expanding opportunity? Very few, very, very few people can do it.
Yeah. Anyway, so bringing the discussion full circle here to the intersection of blockchain and AI, I think a distributed computing protocol, as we've seen, there's another one I want to mention, fetch.io, I think. So they're doing something amazing in the same arena, right? So
Tell everybody what Fetch does.
It's essentially the use case we've discussed, which is it's decentralized computing platform. So you can share resources, computing resources in a decentralized manner. It enables that, and then it also enables the trade using fetch tokens. So when you set a price on a compute or on a service, you need to trade, and fetch tokens would be the currency to make that exchange. And it also allows for what I described before, which is recording the events and decisions of an AI agent onto a chain.
Like that, yep.
Yep. It also enables the data marketplace or the distributed data sharing marketplace. So you publish your data, you publish in the token form, and then somebody buys it, and then you make a deal, right? And then you also set boundaries to what can that be used for.
My question, though, from a business perspective, and this is what we were talking about a while ago, same thing, right? Is okay, you go to one of these, you say, hey, here's my data, this is what I'm willing to sell, and you basically do your seller side information, right? Why would a company buy it when there's so many other ways they're getting it right now through so many other, data sources? Why pay you when you get it for free somewhere else?
Yeah. So if you want to go deeper, watch my first TEDx talk, which is exactly on this topic. It's on identity data, right? And we look at principles of self-sovereign identity where the user or the owner of the data should have control over it and should have say in what the data is being used for, et cetera, et cetera. The answer to your question is that may be true for genetic data. Let's take the use case of the specific type of cancer I mentioned, right? Or I'll give you another similar use case. There's an experiment in bioinformatics called microarray experiment. I did research using that data set like 15, 17 years ago. Yeah. And at that time, what I found is that there are 5 universities and essentially 5 databases owned by those universities that keep a record of microarray experiments. Okay. There's no other place to get it because the experiment is difficult to conduct. You need to have a certain type of lab, et cetera, a certain type of people to do it. And when you do it, you get those results and you store it in that particular database. Okay. So one doesn't talk to the other. If one is in Europe, the other is in America, and we are replicating the experiments that the other guy did already. Wouldn't it be nice if we could share that and say, okay, you've done these 5, I've done these 5, there's no reason to replicate them, let's do something new, right? So in use cases like that, where there is niche domain data that is not available publicly, then it makes a lot more sense to put it on a data marketplace, and then a particular buyer could buy it. I mean, it's not internet data. Yeah, you can crawl the internet, but you won't find this data on the internet.
I do think that, great example, and I agree with you. I think what's going to have to happen, though, is there's going to have to be new regulation, right, which allows you can't use a person's data, but specifically not just a check mark, check here, you went to this website, whatever, right? But a official written document saying, I approve you to use my data for money, right? And then once legislation, I think we're heading that way. I don't know if it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but I think we'll get there. Then I think you have the environment now where you can control your data itself, right?
Exactly. So, you in the mood for last history story?
Yeah, let's do it.
You brought up regulation. The year is, I want to be sure, I think 1865. There's a law in United Kingdom, Britain. This is the time automobiles are just coming to birth.
Okay.
People are driving cars on the roads.
So this has been like 1895?
1865, around that, or 1895. We can check.
Yeah, I think it's 1895 because cars didn't come around until 1895.
Okay, sure. So I get mixed up with these numbers. I'm dyslexic, so please fact check me on that. The act is called the Red Flag Act.
Okay.
And it states that when an automobile is approaching, it should have a crew of minimum of 3 people, 3 humans, one of which should be in front of the automobile carrying a red flag or a lantern at night, alerting other drivers that an automobile is approaching them. Think about that. A human needs to walk in front of the automobile. And at that time, the speeds of automobile were not that high. So a human would determine how fast an automobile could move. And if you think of that type of regulation, do you think that would survive today's automobile technology? Can we even, it seems like a really, fictitious thing to think about, well, we had such regulation, but we did. I believe in a lot of domains in our world today, being it crypto, being AI, being it in blockchain, even being it in quantum computing and IoT based processes, we are living in the Red Flag Act era of regulation. Technology and regulation are always a few phase lags behind. Technology comes, the first time the Wright brothers took a flight, they didn't think of air traffic control.
Yeah, it's kind of like a pendulum, right? Like technology comes, regulation comes, but then it's scared, so it swings away.
Right, exactly.
Prevents everything.
It shuts down everything, and then you come to a middle point. Yeah. So the point I'm making is, and this goes to the recent political discourse in America and around the world on data and on blockchain and crypto. There has been a very strong contingent of people that have argued laws already exist. We don't need new laws for these new technologies and new ways of doing business, enabling new business models. And there is some truth to that. Some laws can be applied, and some basic principles don't change regardless of what technology is being used. But in a lot of other ways, I see that we live very conveniently in the world of Red Flag Act, where the laws are so absurd as it relates to what the technology could possibly do. It's not even in the same. Exactly.
It's my contention with government in general.
Yeah.
Right. The only way that I can make you, the only way I can keep you from making a bad decision as a person is to eliminate all your decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So I take away 10 good decisions because I don't want you to make that one bad decision.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, particularly in the world of AI, where where the people who win the next 10, 15 years of AI win the next 200 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we got to be really. I'm not saying there shouldn't be governance. I'm not saying there shouldn't be guardrails, but we better be careful about how much we do it because we have people like North Korea, Russia, China. They don't really care about those guardrails, right? And so it's not just an economic; it's a geopolitical as well too. Right?
Yeah. So that brings me to another interesting point. To me, the world is evolving really fast, and people have a struggle in understanding that complexity.
Yes.
So things are going to break at some fault lines. So if you look at geology, how do earthquakes happen? Earthquakes don't happen everywhere. They happen where there is a fissure line. There are a few tectonic plates that are colliding and they shift, and hence they create a shock, a tremor. And as a result, if the tremor is big enough, you create new landmass, and new geography, new terrain emerges, right? So these are fault lines. So you start talking about geopolitics and essentially regulation and AI, etc. So just a shameless plug, and I think we can wrap with this. I'm about to launch my new podcast called Edge of Tomorrow. And the premise of that podcast is to uncover, discuss, explore these fault lines. Where are things going to break? If you look at the forces that are acting, where are we going to see pressure points, fissure points, and what emergent landmass can we possibly imagine to occur after that, to emerge after that, right? So we're going to be covering different fault lines in each episode, and then we will connect it to a historical story, as we did in some cases today, to relate it to how we did with how did we deal with technological revolution and evolution in the past, in history, and what can we learn from that for our future. Right? So, Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow. Well, listen, I appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation. We'll probably split this up over 4 or 5 days. But if you're out there, we appreciate you attending, listening to whichever session this happens to be on. As I understand it, this is the worst time since COVID, as far as COVID, you know, codes, etc. They said there's more people in the hospital since COVID than has been before COVID. So I hope if you're out there that you're safe, you're staying away from COVID, you're staying away from the codes, and hopefully in doing so you were able to watch our episode. So appreciate you. Look forward to it. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.